Welcome everyone to our webinar and our AGM meeting. I'm Graham Hunt. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which the Sydney Central Branch operates, which is the land of the Cadigal clan of the Eora Nation. We acknowledge their leaders, past, present and emerging, and we also acknowledge their sustainable stewardship of the country over many millennia. We have the pleasure of welcoming two speakers, Mr. Stephen McCulloch, who's a Regional Property Manager of St Vincent De Paul Society, and he'll be joined by Vasilios Giotis of Blue Green Engineering. They'll be talking about how the St Vincent De Paul Society, a well-known not-for-profit organisation, has included sustainability in their quest for social justice, and how individuals can make a positive difference in their workplace by advocating for sustainability changes. Normally, Renew as an organisation focuses on what people can do within their environment to make it more sustainable. However, it is also worth becoming aware of how we can also make change in our workplaces. I've known both Stephen and Vasilios for many years, from a time when we were all members of AUSIS, the Australian Solar Energy Society, which has now become the Smart Energy Council. And so they have been involved in this space of energy efficiency for quite a long time, and their experience is quite extensive. And so we're looking forward to hearing from them. And I'd like to introduce Stephen to take the floor.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. My name is Stephen McCulloch, as Graham has just introduced me. I'm from St Vincent De Paul Society, and with me today to help in this presentation is Vasilios Giotis, who is a technical engineer from Blue Green Engineering. We are going to be talking to you today about two topics, primarily about Charles O'Neill House and then an upgrade. We had some upgrading facilities we did at that property, which comprised of an audit which led into the installation of solar PV, LED lighting, and an upgrade to the air conditioning, which was probably the main part of this topic. We also will be touching on some statewide projects to do with, again, LED lighting, the rollout of solar PV. We're going to be carrying out a carbon audit, and I was going to talk about the circular economy, but I'm not going to be touching it on now. But other than that, to say the circular economy relates primarily to clothing, which is, as you will probably realise, St Vincent De Paul's, or Vinnies, we collect a lot of clothing, and there's new drives in that area towards the recycling of that of a lot of waste clothing. Onto the main subject, which is about Charles O'Neill House. This is the former building that we occupied, which is Mary Potter Wing. It was a hospital. It was occupied for some years by St Vincent De Paul's offices, and in 2012 we rebuilt the facility, which you can actually see to the left of that picture of the building, which is the Charles O'Neill House, which is this building here. Without going into too many details on the structure of the building, a lot of that's there, who built it, etc. The building did, though, get awarded a number of green awards, which is somewhat surprising considering its current the works that we've had to do to it. But then again, it may be reflective of the time, 2010, 2012, because standards, if you look at Green Star, for example, have considerably modified it over that time. It's approximately 4,000 square meters. It's on 4 levels with 1 level of basement parking. It has an important aspect, which is that it faces northwest towards Petersham Park, which in itself creates some problems because we've got a glazed frontage and a lot of sun, which can cause considerable occupant comfort when the sun shines. It is also open plan on 3 levels. I'm just going to, let's look at some of the problems with this building. Essentially, it's a heating and cooling issue. most of these problems can be dealt with. I always knew that they could be, but the dominant problem that's experienced with occupant comfort is a mix of the sun coming in from the northwest, from Petition Park during the morning hours predominantly, which causes occupant comfort. But also we have this thing called an atria. Now the atria is an issue, or it was considered to be an issue, in as much that there's air rises through the atria, which many occupants considered to be the cause they were getting too hot on the upper floors, whilst on the ground floor in the winter it was too cold. This wasn't the problem. The problem was the regulation of air, which Vasilius will touch on shortly. The other issue, incidentally, as well, was that we have a number of hot boxes, which you can see where my cursor is right now. You will notice that there's 2 offices there. These are add-on offices, and they tend to get very hot because they were retrofit. What the air conditioning really wasn't suitable in order to cool them or heat them accordingly. So that has created problems, and we have to some extent fixed that. Overall, it had a very excessive energy consumption. Now that's probably, how do you measure that? Whether it's excessive, I suppose you compare it against other buildings, but certainly we consider that we could considerably reduce its energy consumption. Over to Vasilius. Thank you.
To better understand what we did as engineering consultants in this building, I've added a simple diagram here which explains the main air conditioning components of the building, and the main energy users. One of the main ones on the roof was the chiller. Now this produces hot or cold water depending if it's in cooling or heating mode. This hot or cold water is transferred to the AHU, which is the air handling unit. The purpose of the air handling unit is to take the energy from the hot or cold water and create hot or cold air, which is used to condition the space. So from the air handling unit, this conditioned air goes to the VAV box, which regulates the volume of air that is supplied. And through floor diffusers, that's transferred to the occupants. The air is conditioned, and then it comes back through a return air duct through the air handling unit. So that's basically how the air conditioning system operates in the building. Next slide, please, Stephen. Excuse me. So we were perplexed as to why such a high-end building with all these awards was not performing. So we implemented a process which included an energy audit, a design scope of works, and we did some project management. Excuse me. So the project management included a tender process, contract management, services during construction, and commissioning witnessing. So that's what we did. And now we're in the ESCI generation phase after we've implemented the project. So next slide, please, Stephen. So one of the findings of the energy audit is this graph here, which shows how energy consumption is correlated against weather. So whether we express this via cooling degree days, and we expected to see a line that is correlated to the dotted line, and the correlation was not that great. So this showed that if the weather was hot, the energy consumption would not increase, and also if the weather was too cold, also the energy consumption would not increase as well. So we dug further into this. Next slide, please, Stephen. And we installed data loggers, temporary energy data loggers on the subsystem. So this is a temporary data logger on the chiller, and we plotted against weather. And we did see some fluctuation depending on if the weather was cold or hot, but not that much. Next slide, please, Stephen. And we also did that for the air handling unit, and we found that 2 issues with the air handling unit. So irrespective of outdoor conditions or indoor conditions, the air handling unit pretty much operated constantly. Moreover, it started when there was no one in the building. The diagram on the right hand side shows that it starts at 5:30 a.m. So it would bring in winter time. This is May, so close to winter. Well, it would bring in cold water at cold air at 5 a.m. in the morning, and then which would cool the building down, and then the system had to reheat the building up before the occupants came through. So the controls were fighting each other. Next slide, please, Stephen. So following the energy audit and these problems, the recommendations were basically the financial recommendations were to spend $55,000 for a project that paid back in 2.4 years. We went to tender based on those recommendations and were able to reduce the cost from $55,000 to $44,000, which also reduced the payback time. Next slide, please, Stephen. So this is what we did in the building. The scope of works that we wrote up proposed a new BMS system with new operational parameters. And one of the operational parameters was to reduce the pressure and the flow rate on the VAV boxes, which regulate the volume flow, we said. So, and doing this, we observed that the old system was pushing too much air into the space, and the new system catered for the building's needs and modulated the flow according to the load. So if there was no need, the system would reduce the pressure even lower. Next one, please, Stephen. So other things that we did is that during after hours, between 9 and 5, the set point temperatures for cooling would go up by degrees. So instead of 23, we'd have 24 degrees outside normal operating hours, and also a degree lower for heating during winter time. Moreover, if the outdoor air temperature was below 18 degrees, there'd be no cooling. And also we regulated the flow of fresh air based on carbon dioxide sensors. So if there was enough fresh air in the building, the system would not bring in fresh air. Because it is fresh air is a main consumer on air conditioning energy, because if it's for example, a 35-degree day outside and you bring in fresh air, you have to condition that air to comfort levels. Moreover, we optimized the operation of the chiller. We introduced a night purge function, which purpose was to flush out the warm air early in the morning before cooling. And also we had an optimal warm-up procedure for winter time, and it was different for each floor. Next slide, please, Stephen. And during the commissioning process, we made sure that the parameters were entered by the contractor as per the design documentation and the design intent. And we made sure that those parameters were producing energy savings through the building and also better thermal comfort. Next slide, please, Stephen. So, and the conclusion that we've drawn from all this process is that this was an award-winning building, but because there is the hardware, the hardware may exist in the building, that does not always guarantee performance. So what does guarantee performance is understanding the needs of the occupants of the building, as well as providing a good tuning service. Tuning is very important in guaranteeing low energy performance. And moreover, in some cases, if you don't have the budget in your building to install the latest gadgets, you can get energy savings out of what you have by better tuning and better controls. So now I'll hand back to Stephen, and thank you for your time. Stephen will talk about the energy savings that were actually generated.
This is a little table of the energy savings that we actually achieved, and you can see what we compared was the base year 2019 against the operating year 2020, where we looked at predominantly the kilowatt hours. We did actually look at kVA as well, but predominantly we looked at kilowatt hours. And we looked at the percentage change, and we can see a change all the way from January through to December. But let's just look at this in a graph. What we see here is on the blue line is the base year 2019, and then we superimpose the results from the from 2020, and we'll just add to this some key points. So if you look in January 2020, you can see that immediately when we added solar PV, because we actually added a 40 kilowatts of solar PV panels, and we put in a 30 kilowatt inverter. You can see there is a drop correlation in the January of that year. We then, in the following months, we actually had a breakdown in the air conditioning system, in as much that the chiller on the roof, 50% of it stopped working. We actually had to add supplementary units to get the building cold, and it really did push up our energy consumption as a result. Then in March, we got COVID-19, of course, hit, so we had a reduced occupancy. Now, it's interesting that a reduced occupancy, this building now is meant to now actually sense the reduced occupancy. In March, it wouldn't have done that, but the reality is it probably would have picked up some of the reduction in occupancy. You can see then in June, we added LED lighting, another upgrade. It was quite a large upgrade to the building, and then you can see where the air conditioning modifications cut in July. These are a little bit late for delivery, but essentially they did cut in. And you can see, if you go back up to the table above, you can actually see the overall drop. If you can see where my cursor is, you can actually see that we had these general reduction in energy of about 25%. This reaches up to 50, then 60%. December has dropped back a little bit. We don't know what's caused that, but again, in January we've seen a 62% reduction over year 2019. So we consider that a pretty good result. Obviously, once the occupiers come back in full, and we are seeing people drifting back slowly as lockdown becomes less restrictive, we're not expecting as much as 60%. If we can achieve 40% reduction overall, that would be good over 2019, but 50% would be a real bonus. What have we saved at the moment? We're showing we saved 130 tons of carbon, which I looked up online. It's worked out at 28.1 passenger vehicles equivalent. That is, I might add, as an American study, so it's whether Australia is different is another matter. We have other things that we want to do to this building. Occupant comfort is still an issue because of the glazing in the front of the building. The glazing, we get a lot of irradiated heat. We want to add probably an infrared blocker that will benefit both the occupants, and it will also further relieve the air conditioning system. I also have other buildings around the state which also we need to look at the air conditioning. We have two major big buildings in Woolloomooloo, for example, and one is our office training facility. The other one is a men's hostel. Moving on, we have a number of other projects around the state. The predominant ones, one of the predominant ones is a lighting upgrade to LED lighting. If you can imagine that we have 430 sites approximately around New South Wales, both leasehold and freehold. Of that, we are currently trying to now roll out LED lighting, and we have been through the testing phase. In fact, Charles O'Neill House was one of the buildings we put through at the testing phase on LED lighting. A lot of the testing is much about making sure as we roll out, we envisage what sort of problems we might come across as we roll through, and making sure that the contract that we have for this project will fit. We're now into phase 2, which is statewide rollout, and in fact, we're actually currently in the process of rolling out to 90 sites. So it's just one part of the 430 buildings. We're also going to have a third phase, and that will be any upgrading works to the lighting itself, which we're leaving to a later stage simply because it has impacts on the NEC saving certificates. And also, whilst we're installing, will identify what upgrades we require. We have funded this project predominantly through ESCIs and the paybacks, but also the particular contractor that we selected to do these works also decided that they offered a major sponsorship of one of our vans, which is the Vinnie's van here in Sydney, which is a food assistance van. Also, they offered to do us for nothing a carbon audit, which is, to me, is extremely valuable. So let's say an audit of the whole society's carbon production. Phase 2A, basically these are statistics. We're expecting a saving in electricity of $223,000. That's quite a good dent on our operational costs, but also it does save CO2, just under 780 tons of CO2. Payback though is 12 months. That's really is good. That's on the retail shops. On all the other facilities, 8.7 months payback. Overall, 10.9. Honestly, those are very good paybacks. But if you take into account the sponsorship and the carbon audit, effectively that payback will come down to about two or 3 months. But it's good even if you can achieve 12 months. Those are the statistics in terms of carbon and how many passenger vehicles. Moving on, we're also doing a solar PV rollout. Now, solar is a little bit different. Obviously, we're not going to install it on leasehold sites, or not unless we have an arrangement, a shared arrangement with the landlord. But at the moment, what we've done is we've identified all suitable sites. Not all suitable sites are suitable. We have about 230 owned facilities, and we needed to review each of those. From that 230, we actually engaged the consultant who's an expert in this area, and from that we identified 93 suitable target sites. We've then gone into a more detailed analysis of those sites using helioscopes and looking at the energy costs at each of those sites. There's a lot of analysis that's gone into that. Once we've done that analysis, once we've identified all the sites that we want to target, which is the 93, we've now started going through a process of obtaining grant funding. So whilst you can get SDCs and you can get other renewable sort of for your carbon, what we also needed to be able to justify these installations for the society was to actually get additional grant funding. So these are the 3 grants that we've applied for. We've already achieved awards through the Energy Efficiencies Program and the Community Building Partnerships Program, but we're currently also looking for further funding on the Stronger Communities Program. From this, though, the grants that we've already got, we've now got 38 projects underway, and we're actually in the process of actually drawing out specifications, and then we're going to put out to tender all 38 sites. So that part of the program is already underway. The Stronger Communities will merely find more funding for the remaining sites that aren't already got sufficient funding. So as I say, 38 sites have been awarded funding. So from the 38 sites, we have identified that we've got just under a megawatt of power that we're going to actually be able to put on our roofs. And that will give us a 2-year payback instead of, well, it looks like an average 5.1 year payback comes out to 2 years, which is excellent from our point of view in terms of payback. It gives us annual savings again, which hits our operational costs bottom line. It reduces it by $220,000 a year, which is year on year, of course. Kilowatts saved, 878,000. We've got 720 tons of CO2 saved, and equivalent to 156 vehicles. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen and Vasilius. That's very interesting and really quite powerful of the impact you're looking at achieving in the longer term. We don't at this point have any questions, so if anyone wants to drop a question into the Q&A box, we'll certainly deal with it.
Sorry, can I just make a comment?
Yes.
As an external consultant, I visited one of the sites in the city at Woolloomooloo, which was a hostel. And, you know, Stephen talked about the impact on the environment and the financials. But also, and what Stephen told me, a lot of this money is reinvested back into the organisation. So there's another third angle where people are helped in that this money is goes back to people that need it, that are in need. Isn't that right, Stephen?
Correct.
Yeah. So and you realise that impact once you visit one of the hostels, for example. Once you go there, that how important that is to help those people that that need that money and that help.
Yeah, no, and it's a valid point because, you know, Stephen's demonstrated the short payback periods, but after that payback, those savings that you would have had to been paying in the energy consumption, like you say, can now be redirected into more useful outcomes. We do have one question, but I was wondering, Stephen, since we missed your first few slides, is it difficult to maybe just go back and quickly just show them graphically so people could maybe see what they were? In the interim, there is one question which has come from Robert. He's asking, how well sealed are the buildings to further reduce energy loss, and can they be retro sealed?
Vasilis, that might be one for you to answer. I mean, I know that the buildings we do have are not well sealed. I wouldn't.
The reality is, you know, if we're comparing it to passive house standards, really Australian buildings are not that very well sealed. A lot of people are aware of that. To cost effectively retrofit them, I mean, if that was to be done via the conventional way, I think it'd be very costly and almost impossible. There are a few experimental methods in the residential sector and experimental where they spray a resin into the space and that fills up all the gaps, but I don't know how effective that would be in a commercial building. I don't know if Graham or Stephen, you've heard of these technologies? Yeah.
Yes, there are foams around which people can use. I think the big gain here is more with new buildings now. If we're talking commercial buildings, the energy regulations certainly have been tightened in terms of sealing of the buildings and thermal bridging and so forth. So I think that's where there's going to be a lot of gain, but I'm sure there's a lot of scope to go back and retrofit sealing into older buildings. Did that come into your calculations much, Vasilius, in terms of?
No, we really, it was probably not cost effective within the 1 or 2 year payback that we're two and a half or less payback. I just couldn't see it happening with the current practices.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is a pointer though that with the ceiling of that building, we've had, prior to one of the faults we had, and I haven't actually mentioned it here, one of the faults we did have was that we often got a bit, the front doors and the some of the ground floor doors were staying open at some times of the year, and some of the work that we've done, effectively we're overpressurized at some points. And in fact, we've also got another problem with that building where some of the underground ventilation ducts, because of the way the building works, sometimes get flooded, and we actually don't know where the flooding's coming from, and that puts extra pressurization on the building. So it's another problem we've got to fix at that facility. But it's, you know,
So yeah, as a high-end solution, the return air duct goes down through the bottom underneath the basement in a labyrinth type system to obtain energy from thermal mass. So it has a series of pipes of ducts underneath the car park, so those get flooded, and when they get flooded, they half fill with water, so that effectively reduces the size of the duct, so that increases the pressure on the system.
Yeah, it's another point that if you notice at the front of the building, and if people can see my cursor at the moment, these are actually these glass are actually the return air ducts for the building, and it's always amazed me how we can have these glass air ducts, which effectively the air heats as it returns back down to the basement. So again, if we can put some sort of infrared blocker on the building, it will help actually with the efficiency of the cooling.
Definitely.
I've got another question, which is from Sonia. She's saying, great project, congratulations. And she asks, will you be specifying a solar monitoring platform? I guess for the PV installations. And for the grants, did you have to match the funding via a certain ratio, e.g. $1 for dollar, like from corporate funds?
In the solar monitoring, yes, we are doing solar monitoring on any new project, because essentially, if you can't see what your solar is doing, I mean, quite often by experience, and I know we have a number of systems on. Secondly, in terms of grants, no, we're not looking for a one-for-one. We have a number of, some of the grants we have resulted in one-for-one, but overall we're looking for that sort of 2-year payback at the moment. At the end of the day, I've got to still, with all these grants, with all these projects, once I have the grants, I then have to get board approval in order to move forward on every single on this particular project. But once you know, 50% seems to be sufficient at the moment within the society, or reducing essentially down to a 2-year payback.
Well, that brings up a broader question of how much of a challenge was it for you to convince your board and your management to undertake these projects?
It becomes logical in the end because the paybacks are so good. But what we're doing is we're trying to reduce our operational costs, because it's the operational costs that really affect the society most. So the LED lighting reduces our operational costs massively, and then so does solar PV, but the solar PV has a higher capital input anyway. But once you spell it down to being reducing your operational costs and how quickly you can pay back, they usually come along. The problem I've had this year, though, particularly, is because of COVID. I've managed to get these projects through despite COVID-19. COVID-19 has really got in the way, both from in terms of actually the people resource to be able to get these projects up. And then obviously it's harder to convince the society to go ahead with these projects when we've been hit quite hard by reduced income, because essentially it's our shops that create our income to the society. That's the primary income, and those shops in many cases have shut down, so it's really hit us hard. So to try and get it in a capital project like this up and running, it's all like cash flow, has been more difficult, but common sense has in the end prevailed.
Yeah, that's very positive to hear.
Yeah.
We have a question from Robert. I would have I would hope the teaching of Pope Francis would have helped. If it hasn't so far, can that be noted for future projects, i.e. there is also a moral motivation, not just financial?
Actually, there is a lot of moral in this as well, and the society does recognise that, and I've actually promoted the fact that the people most impacted by climate change are people in need.
Yeah.
And that is just a simple reality. So yes, I'm sure Pope Francis does realise that.
Well, there's another issue too, with like especially what you've done with the building at Lewisham, is you improve the comfort for your occupants.
Yes.
And there must, it's well-known fact that if you improve people's comfort level, they can be more productive as well as feeling better in themselves as well. So there's another benefit there, which is hard to quantify, but it has an ongoing impact.
One of the offices that we have in that building, or two or three, actually three of the offices, particularly in that building, we have a particular problem in as much that it was originally designed as open plan, and because the air conditioning couldn't be controlled properly, we effectively, those offices on the corner of to the northwest were hot boxes, so that again assisted in persuading some of the changes that we implemented. And we definitely have reduced the temperatures in those rooms. We installed a product called V-Cool, and it reduces the heat on the windows, and by applying it to the outside, we considerably reduced effectively the windows were like, they're like a radiator. So you just got this massive radiator that goes up the side of the building. And as I say, the next stage is to do that to the whole of the front of the building. But we did it to those offices, and it's made a massive difference to the occupants.
And there's a question about that as well. What do we mean by infrared blocker? Do you want me to answer that, Stephen? Or
Yes.
Yes.
So a lot of the windows have tinting. So the problem with tinting is that they absorb solar infrared radiation, and when they absorb, they heat up. So the window heats up. So really, if you go to an old tinted window and you put your hand on the glass in the summertime, it'll probably be 60 degrees. So that heat is transferred inside the building. So you don't get the glare, but you do get the heat. So what these infrared blockers or low E windows do, so they contain metal particles that reflect the sunlight, and by applying that window film, the infrared blocker or the low E film blocker on the outside of the windows, it reflects the infrared radiation before it enters the building, so the glass does not get hot.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks very much, Stephen and Vasilius. I think it's really inspiring, the work you're doing, and hopefully we can get other organisations to replicate it elsewhere. Because if you look at that number of buildings across the state and the number of kilowatt hours and carbon equivalent, tonnes that are being saved, it's really quite substantial.
I agree that the impact could be massive.
Yeah.